My name is Isabella. I've never thought of myself as very intelligent, but because of my family, I've had to teach myself a lot. If you saw my family, you would think we were a regular family. My parents reside with me, and I have two younger siblings. My older brother has dropped out of college and is unsure what to do next. Olivia, my younger sister, graduated from high school last year. She graduated as valedictorian. She is currently pursuing a career as a police officer. See? Normal. But only when you look at us like that. The truth is that if you talk to my family, well, it becomes clear. Something is not right. At first, it's difficult to pinpoint the source of the problem. We were at a family reunion a few years ago, and my mother's brother started chatting about toothpaste. What he was saying completely absorbed my parents and brother. Olivia appeared to be trying hard not to giggle. I stopped playing with my cousins to pay attention to them. I thought I'd finally figure out why his breath was so terrible. When I started paying attention, I couldn't believe what he was saying. According to my uncle, the government puts tracking agents in our toothpaste. The government can monitor us when we clean our teeth. That's why he no longer brushes his teeth. Absolutely not. I laughed when I heard that. I mean, he couldn't really be serious, right? When I finally stopped laughing, I noticed my parents and brother were staring at me. My uncle had rushed out of the room. Before my parents could say anything, my mother's father approached us, shaking his head. He began to complain about how absurd the idea was. After that, my parents and brother seemed to agree. But once we were in the car on the way home, they started talking about how being safe may be a good idea. After all, my uncle was a guru. That's exactly what they stated. The issue was that he wasn't in the medical field. He was a computer expert, so he couldn't possibly have known. My parents then began to speculate. They asked him if toothpaste could track us. Some form of nanotechnology must exist. That's how my uncle found out about it. My grandfather, they argued, couldn't possibly understand. Olivia and I exchanged the glance but said nothing while my parents and older brother discussed things we should be doing. Simply in case. When my sister mentioned what my grandfather stated, my mother dismissed the concept. He did, after all, grow up in a different era. He was too old to comprehend the dangers. I wanted to say that my uncle had no knowledge either, but I couldn't. My mother had always looked up to him and believed he knew exactly what he was talking about. That was the time when my life began to change. When I got ready for school the next day, I discovered that my mother had removed all of our toothpaste. I was unable to wash my teeth. Fortunately, I had some gum on hand, which I chewed on before class. I was just in middle school at the time, and I was terrified of being different. It was strange that Olivia took me up from school. Being in high school, she disliked being spotted with her uncool younger sister. However, she stated that this was crucial. On the way home, we stopped at a convenience store, and she purchased me a little tube of toothpaste. It was in my book bag. My mother did prepare toothpaste for us, but it was disgusting. She kept an eye on all of us. Her eyes sparkled with delight. How could I tell her how bad it was? Olivia was less cautious, and she got into problems as a result. She couldn't watch TV until she started brushing her teeth with the new thing. My brother objected to the flavor, but he pretended to be eager to make the sacrifice. He claimed that was the correct thing to do. Things began to shift around the house after that. They began growing their own food. This segment was one of my favorites because the food tasted better. However, our parents stopped taking us out to restaurants because it was too dangerous. Not because their credit card information could be compromised. That is, I could understand. No, they didn't want to eat out since that's how the government got you. Over the course of 2 years, the government's options for getting you went from minor to far-reaching. My parents stopped paying for our phones and then told us we couldn't have them. The only phones allowed in the house were landline phones. They claimed that everything we posted could be tracked, so they destroyed our laptops. It became increasingly difficult to complete my assignments, and my grades began to suffer as a result. I began going to my friends' places more frequently, and I no longer invited them over. Not after one of them, Layla, began talking about how strange my family was at school. She threatened to take my family away if they were crazy. I sensed a barrier between my friends and my family. Most of my friends weren't as harsh as Layla, but it was clear that they felt uneasy hanging out at my house. My invitations to events were decreasing. Olivia has completed her senior year in high school. She wasn't sure she should invite her family to the graduation, especially given what occurred during the winter break. Olivia was irritated by how ridiculous some of their new regulations were, and she began to yell at them to stop and think things through. She used the toothpaste as an example to refute what my uncle had said. What can toothpaste track? People either spit out toothpaste or swallow it in little pieces. There would be no way to track people with all of the bacteria in our mouths, let alone how much it would cost. Not to mention that my brother had 3 teeth out due to cavities. He refused to have fillings because he believed the government could use them to control him. My parents did not listen to any of her arguments. They said she was the one who wasn't thinking, that she was too innocent and sheltered. They claimed that if she couldn't understand how rotten the society around us was, they had failed as parents. Olivia felt she couldn't stand the fighting any longer. She packed her belongings and left that night. My parents didn't talk about it much after that. When they did bring up Olivia, it was almost as if she were a criminal or a mentally ill patient. They'd say they hoped she'd improve, but it was out of their control. My father desired to speak with her, but my mother urged that I leave her alone. My mother predicted that my sister would eventually realize she was correct. She stated that she would pray and that we should all pray. We couldn't afford to let her way of thinking infect us. Of course, this made me extremely uncomfortable. I was not about to inform my parents that I disagreed with them. I was only 16 at the time, and I had no idea where I was going to reside. I had no idea where Olivia intended to live, but I had a feeling she'd be fine. It was an entirely different tale. Olivia worked while maintaining her grades. I realized I couldn't do both. Olivia had gone to live with Grandma and Grandpa, as I discovered after school started. It was a long way from school, but she said it was worthwhile. After that, she would occasionally bring me food from her house to eat. Over the course of a month, I saw that my sister began to look healthier and happier. She smiled more, and she wasn't as slender as she was when she lived with my parents. I mean, I knew we'd all lost weight after my parents switched our diets, but I thought it was fine. We wanted to be slim. It wasn't until I saw my sister recover that I realized how unhealthy we had become. My parents hadn't done much investigation into the modifications to our diets since they were wary of online information. It had never occurred to me that their actions were directly responsible for my weight loss and lack of vitality. Then they started making us perform strange things. For example, when we returned home, my parents would inspect our mouths to make sure nothing had been placed in them. They then utilized small boxes similar to those used by paranormal investigators to examine if any entities had been attached to us while we were at school. After that, we had to take a shower to wash away the chemtrails. Going home became a chore because we were scrutinized for about an hour to ensure we hadn't been contaminated by anything. When I pointed out that we seemed to be losing too much weight, my father responded by saying that ladies were supposed to be extremely slender. He would use images of indigenous tribes that had not been exposed to modern culture to demonstrate this. The government, according to my mother, encouraged people to gain weight so that we could be tracked by the aliens dwelling in Area 51. My father quickly silenced her and looked at me as if I couldn't be trusted with this information. They probably thought I couldn't be trusted because I had shown signs of being controlled. After I went to bed, they began holding family meetings. I finally discovered it after staying up late preparing for my trigonometry exam. My younger siblings were exhausted the next morning because they even woke them up. I'm not sure what they did in those sessions, but my younger brother and sister were always sore the next day. When I went to follow them, I noticed all of the small traps they had laid that might seriously injure someone. A door with a brick at the top, so that when someone pushed the door open, it would smack them in the head. On the stairs, there was a wooden plank with a few nails protruding from it. It was almost as if my parents had regressed to the level of a child, and I was becoming more like the parent. My older brother stood guard at the door of the family meeting so that he could hear what they said while keeping me out. Certainly not just me. I believe they were frightened that the government, aliens, lizard people, or robots would come and quiet them as well. To be honest, I'm struggling to keep up with the newest foe. Due to the meetings, I was unable to move the traps, but I ensured their removal the following morning to prevent any injuries. My father began listening to a hand radio which can hear both the police and the nearby military post. My parents and brother now take turns listening to it during peak hours when our adversaries are putting out their plans. I long for the way my parents used to be. They were always a little weird, but it was more in the way that parents were embarrassingly weird in front of their friends when I was a kid. In public, they now strive to act like everyone else. To be honest, they appear to be under the control of someone else. I mean, if you saw them out in public, you'd assume they were criminals because of the way they're always glancing around and the ridiculous amount of stuff they bring with them, even just to go to the pharmacy. They don't go to stores very often. When they do, every object must go through a complex detection process before any of us can use it. What's going on inside her house has gotten progressively worse over the last year. Olivia went by my school a few months ago and asked me to come see her because she wanted to make sure I was okay. I mean, I didn't visit her all that frequently, so I started to get anxious. Is there a problem? I inquired. She must have realized I was afraid at that point. Olivia shook her head, saying, "No, not really. You simply appeared to be in need of a rest." It wasn't until she left that I began to suspect she was keeping something from me. Maybe she wanted to talk about it, but my reaction made her reconsider. When I went to visit my grandparents, they were all behaving strangely. Olivia was never a particularly good liar. Therefore, her performance was by far the worst. I wanted to ask them what was wrong, but they all seemed to think I was too young or that it would worry me too much. I inquired multiple times, but they were usually dismissive. We sat outside to have dinner. My grandmother is an excellent cook, and my grandfather makes the finest grilled vegetables and fish. I enjoy eating at their restaurant, but I couldn't enjoy it this time. Something was wrong, but no one told me. I excused myself from the meal, stating I needed to use the toilet. I crept into Olivia's room during their meal. I know I shouldn't have done it. She is, or soon will be, a police officer. But I needed to know what they weren't telling me. I noticed some paperwork from work stashed away in one of her bags. My sister was never particularly good at keeping things organized. Her handwriting wasn't terrific, but I'd learned to read it years ago. I pulled out the newspaper before we became good friends, and the police were ready to arrest a bunch of conspiracy theorists. The list included my uncle's name, listing him as the primary suspect. He obviously intended to break into the military base. I'm not sure what he and the others planned. All I knew was that I was relieved that my parents' names weren't among those on the list. But suddenly, I remembered my brother's name. A voice startled me. That is not something you should be doing. Olivia was the one. I wasn't about to apologize because I had every right to be informed. She stated how badly thought out the strategy was and how no one was intended to be wounded. They were still planning something illicit. The cops were going to arrest them as soon as they started walking towards the base. This occurred a few weeks ago. My parents had no idea what my brother was planning. He never informed them. He seemed to believe they were overly soft. They aren't doing enough to keep us safe. My parents became concerned because they had never suspected my brother. Police officers are now visiting their homes every few days. I'm not sure which one bothers them more. The fact that my brother deceived them or the cops' refusal to leave us alone. Additionally, a few members of the media arrived, but we promptly escorted them off our property. It's the only time my parents appeared to be willing to contact the cops. I'm not sure what will happen. My parents haven't given up on conspiracy theories. They appear to be even more persuaded that the world is going insane. My father has mentioned taking the family into the woods and living off the grid. I know I'm not going with them. What concerns me are my younger brother and sister. They appear to be picking up a lot from my parents. I'm scared they'll believe everything because they're a lot younger than Olivia and me. When I told my grandparents about my concerns, they promised to speak with my parents. If necessary, they have stated that they will accept all of us into their home. We don't want to involve the cops or the government any further. For the time being, I'm still living at home and taking things one day at a time. I'm attempting to be there for my younger brother and sister in the same way that Olivia was for me. I've learned to use other conspiracy theories to counteract some of my parents' concerns. When they tried to pull us out of school, I told them that seeing the dangers was the best way to grasp them. When my parents wanted to quit coming to the doctor, I told them that was what the government would want because it left us more susceptible to simple ailments. I told my parents that I was going to become a doctor so that we wouldn't have to go to the doctor as often. But for the time being, we had to keep going so that it wasn't clear. My parents now look at me differently. The family gatherings have ceased, which leads me to believe that it was my brother's idea all along. My folks now believe he was insane and reckless. I must restrain myself from saying the same thing about them. They've also started serving us healthier meals, mostly because I've begun to research nutrition. They now believe me when I say we need to be more careful about our nutrition since I'm going to be a doctor. My parents now listen to me as long as I include something outlandish as part of my proof. I wish to assist my parents, I truly believe it. But they are adults and they have the right to think whatever they want.